Transforming outdoor spaces. This show is full of ideas that you can use at home, and it all starts right after this. Over the past 20 years as a garden designer, I've enjoyed helping homeowners create private sanctuaries full of beauty and wonder. I find each garden to be a fresh opportunity to explore ways to create uniquely personal spaces. These are just a few of the gardens I've helped to transform into garden homes. Hi, I'm Alan Smith. Welcome to The Garden Home, a show about design and blurring the lines between inside and out. Now, we've got a lot going on out here at the Garden Home Retreat. The house is coming along beautifully, and the gardens, well, they're beginning to settle in. Now, today's show is about the outside and how these gardens are coming along. But first, I want to talk to you about some of the principles of design that I brought out in my first book. My city garden is actually quite small. You see, it sits on a 100 by 150 foot lot, but it's divided into a series of garden rooms. And what really struck me is how on a small city lot I was able to make a garden around the house feel larger simply by dividing the areas into outdoor rooms, and each has a unique theme or feel. For example, the fountain garden, which extends out from my library, is a room with walls, a holly hedge, and a floor, which is a gravel path, and doors, the twin entry arbors, and even furnishings in the way of benches. Oh, and I can't forget about decorations. You see, the fountain is, of course, the centerpiece, but there are also trellises and containers that decorate the space. So when I started with this property, it was literally a blank slate, or a blank canvas, if you will, and with plants and structures, I painted the picture. Okay? Now, in today's show, what I'd like to do is weave in and out of that garden, this garden, the Garden Home Retreat, of which we are under construction with, as well as some of the gardens I've designed over the years. Now, why don't we get started by going to my city garden and take a look and a tour of that property, and then we'll come back here to the Garden Home Retreat at Moss Mountain. And when you step into the garden, there's the front garden with a long axis that runs from north to south. Now, the beds that border the lawn path are made up primarily of perennials, but there are a lot of shrub roses and climbing roses in there, as well as pockets of annuals, as well as in the spring, lots of bulbs. The inspiration for this garden came from Arley Hall in Cheshire, England. The borders at Arley are on a much grander scale. And we're not talking just size here. You see, these grand gardens were laid out in the 1840s, and I'd estimate the length of them to be about that of a football field. But I have to say, as you stroll down the path, it certainly isn't dull, because the abundance of color and bloom bursting forth at every step is really quite amazing. So you can see how a garden room like this could really be inspiring. So I use this as the inspiration for my city garden, a tribute to Arley on a much, and I mean much, smaller version. Now, moving around my garden home, we enter the next room, which is the fountain garden, which you've already seen a glimpse. Now, stepping out of this garden room, you'll pass through a hallway that's flanked on each side with parterre gardens. Now, these simple elements are used to create a certain effect. I used boxwood, a metal tuteur, and some white climbing roses. Now, occasionally, I'll plant out the parterre, the spaces between the boxwoods, with tulips for a little added drama. Now, in my rondelle garden in the city, it's much smaller, but it's a great place to experiment nonetheless. It's a round space. Basically, there's a flattened circle or oval lawn, and around the edge of that lawn, I have beds, 4 of them, in fact, and each one I give a theme. One year it may be full of hot colors, like these fiery reds and oranges. Whatever we pick, it's always fun to watch these gardens progress as the spring gives way to summer, and the summer finally to fall. Now, behind the rondelle is the vegetable garden. Anchored by the tool shed, this series of raised beds has been the source of more produce than I could possibly enjoy. Now, passing through, on the other side of the house, we enter the loggia-covered breezeway. This space is served as an outdoor entertaining area, a place to paint and relax, and even a studio for creating flower arrangements and crafts. Now, I want to talk to you about this idea of making walls in the garden. Now, some of these are obvious. I mean, a stone wall, a brick wall, of course, that's a wall. A hedge can be a wall, can give you that effect, but there are also other ways to do this. I've used tall grasses to make a wall in the garden to divide space. And here you can see I'm using espaliered trees to create a separation of one part of the garden to the other. Now, these pears are really coming along beautifully. They were supported by these bamboo stakes and they're just about to wear out. So we've made this metal trellis that will go in this place to train the trees on. So you begin to get an idea of some of the things you can do. Another clever way to create a wall is to make a string trellis. You see, I just put in a series of posts, ran a horizontal board across the top and a horizontal board across the bottom, and then just went up and down with string or twine. And the asparagus beans grow up and make a solid wall of green. Now, other places out here in the Garden Home Retreat, we've used cabling. For instance, on the Gala apples, it's a great way to support those espaliered trees. Again, they provide division in the space. Now, you may say, well, look, I don't want to go to all that much trouble, and hey, I may not even be sure that I want to put something in permanently. Well, think about growing a fast-growing annual and create the space you want and just observe it for one season. Use something like corn or okra or even sunflowers. You can create quite an effect with those. Now, back at my garden in the city, if you go down the shade path and you take a left and just peek in, you'll see that service area. Now, it's not really a garden room, but a very functional space. Inside it, I have a lath house. This is a place to shelter plants that can't take too much heat or cold. And then we have a little greenhouse, a relatively new addition to the garden. The greenhouse is a great place to get a jump start on the season. All right, now if you get back out on the shade path, you're just about to finish the tour. You go through an arbor created with Camellia sasanqua. This is a fall-blooming camellia, one called Maiden's Blush. And you enter onto the south side of the garden, which will eventually take you back around to the front and onto the porch. And I have to say, the front porch from time to time serves as a garden room of its own. Now, this idea of dividing spaces up into garden rooms proved so successful, I wanted to apply some of those same principles out here at the Garden Home Retreat. It's a much larger canvas, I know, but those principles still apply, just on a larger scale. Now, I want you to use your imagination here because I want to give you a tour around the Garden Home Retreat and show you what we're doing in the way of some of these garden rooms. Now, take a look at this space. This is sort of the foyer, if you will, or the entry room, and it's centered around this colossal oak. I've been told that it could be up to 350 years old. Now, this beautiful thing is really the center point of the entire complex. The house and the two buildings are on axis with this tree. You see, it's a post oak, or Quercus stellata. And what I love about it is it's so archetypal. It's the kind of tree you would have drawn as a child. It's just perfect with its shape. What I've done is underplanted it with a variety of bulbs, mainly white daffodils, and they're spectacular when they flower in the spring. Now, here's where I need for you to use your imagination. The way this is going to become more of a room, if you follow this gravel driveway around, you can see it makes an arc. And if you follow it all the way around on this side, the two arcs come together and make a circle. It's a ring or circular driveway around the tree. And we've positioned this well away from the drip line of that tree because I don't want anything to happen to it. All right, so with this line scored, as it were, we're going to line each side of it with boxwood, just basic Buxa sempervirens, the old-fashioned boxwood. And so you'll have boxwood on both sides of the driveway going up to the front. Very simple, but these boxwoods will create a sense of a wall or enclosure in this space, giving it that room-like look. Now, the next room you would go to would be the front porch. So as you can see, we still have a ways to go with this porch, but I've kind of looked at it, well, like a platform or a stage. It's 12 feet deep, it's very generous, and it's 40 feet long. In fact, earlier in the year, we had all the master gardeners out here, and some of my bluegrass buddies got up here and used it as a stage. Now, as you can see, this will be a great platform to view this garden room down here. Now, if you like the way this looks, wait till you see the back. Come on. Well, clearly over here is where all of the action's going on. You can see between the brick going on the house and all the trim, it's really coming together. Now, what's exciting to me about the back of the house is that you actually have a ground floor porch, a second-story porch, and a third-story porch. These are going to provide wonderful views of the river beyond. Now, what's going to happen back here in this space is, and I know it doesn't look like it now, and you got to use your imagination, this is going to be a lawn. It's going to be a croquet lawn. And it's roughly double the size of the porch that we just saw. So the proportions work really well. And what we're creating here is yet another garden room. You see, you have the back wall of the room here with the house. You've got these double porches going up. And then on each side, you have the summer kitchen on one side, and on the west side, you have the studio. And then to the north, well, you've got that spectacular view. Now, you may remember that a few weeks ago, this back area was all dug up to make room for the rainwater harvesting system that will be fed from the gutters on the house. I can't wait to start implementing this plan and start irrigating the garden with this water. Now, I want to say one thing about these buildings before we move on. They're coming along as well. They're getting the trim boards up, and those are in redwood because, well, it lasts so long, and that's the idea here. We want this thing to last for years and years to come. And the siding that's going up on the sides is clapboard, but it's actually made of concrete. Now think about that. That's really going to last. Now, I love these buildings because they're really, well, a large percentage of the walls is actually these gorgeous windows that move back and forth. And this one I'm going to use as my painting studio, so I can't wait to get that easel set up. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to get out of the epicenter of this activity. Let's shift away from the construction zone and move a little more into the garden. This is the fountain garden. Now here I have 4 distinct beds in each corner, with a fountain in the center. Now in the beds there's a vitex tree and some roses. The vitex blooms beautifully all summer long with these tall spiky purple blooms. Now if you look east or west from this point, you'll see the vegetable garden. Well, I should say it's not only vegetables because there are a lot of flowers in there. Now beyond the vegetable garden is the orchard. And this spring, this space was awash with wildflowers. In years to come, this orchard will be laid out in a quincunx grid. At the end of each side of the vegetable garden is a terminus. The end of the east garden has a brown turkey fig to anchor its space. And on the west side, it naturally leads visitors back up to a herbaceous walk that serves as a hallway between the structural areas and the gardens below. And we can't forget about the greenhouse just east of the garden. This is a wonderful garden room. Even during the cold months, you can use it as a functional space to start plants and protect them from the winter. But during the fall and spring, you can use this as a garden room and decorate it with furnishings. Now this just gives you an idea of just some of the garden rooms we've created out here at the Garden Home Retreat. The idea is you can create these spaces just about anywhere you live. Now a key component to any outdoor living space, of course, is furnishings. It can be a simple wooden bench, or it can be a more elaborate outdoor dining set. Whatever your style is, you've got to consider a few factors. Number 1, what look or feeling are you going for? Country charm or city sophistication? Second, durability. The furniture has to hold up to the elements to make it. And lastly, comfort. What good does it do to have the nicest outdoor dining room if your guests are squirming in their seats all night because they're sitting on a hard wooden or metal chair? Soften them up with some cushions and provide seating that helps guests relax. I had the opportunity to talk to a stylist, Patty Fry, during a visit to North Carolina where she showed me around a home of one of her clients. Patty, I can't wait to see what you've done.
Well, come on in, Alan.
My heavens.
It's nice to start off with a great garden room. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Good heavens.
Yeah.
Look at the sense of enclosure these walls give you.
Right.
I mean, it really does feel like a room, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Even the gates that create a sense of entry and a focal point here.
We designed the room, the garden room, the same way you would an inside room, where we start off with focal points such as the fireplace, and we've got a nice green background and the hardscape, and that gives us a starting point for everything else.
Beautiful. I mean, when you think about walking into like a living room with a fireplace, I mean, it is the dominant feature.
It is.
And so you can't like pretend it's not there.
Right, right. You really want to call attention to it.
Yeah, and the hardscape here is this beautiful stone, which, you know, is not unlike the sort of flooring one might have inside your house.
Right. You want to be careful, and based on what the color of the stone and the surrounding hardscape is, that's how you should begin selection of fabrics and frame colors.
I see. So what you've done here is you've sort of looked at the tonal quality of what this hardscape is, rather than going to the foliage or the blooms,
right.
which most of us would do.
Because you really want to create some kind of a contrast.
Right.
And then another thing we like to do is take more subtle patterns and contrast the pillows just the same way as you would do inside of the home.
How well will this hold up in the sunlight?
It's solution dyed acrylic, and it will wear the life of the furniture. It will not fade.
I mean, this looks like it could be in your living room.
I know. That's one thing we are seeing in outdoor furniture is the blurring of the lines between indoor and outdoor.
Well, this is absolutely gorgeous. Hats off, Patty.
Thank you. Thank
really great. Well, I think we better leave this garden room and go into a room in the house because it's about to rain.
I think so.
There's so much going on out here at the Garden Home Retreat, and today is another big day in the construction process. Look at these big crates that they're unloading. Well, this is the roof system for the cottage. It's a standing seam roof. You see, you can find these roofs on historic houses going back to really the first quarter of the 19th century. And what's fantastic is that these roofs don't have to be replaced. They'll last for hundreds of years. Well, looks like I better get out of the way as they bring in the next load of panels. Gardens are a constantly changing palette and also a unique way to reconnect to the past. We caught up with Kathy Roberts in her garden to hear how it's changed since her family started renovating it and how she's using it as a way to keep the spirit of her gardening ancestors alive.
We started this garden in about 1996, and the yard had no garden. It basically had a rock wall, some nandinas, a lot of hedge, and that was about it. So we started out with the pool, the pond for the goldfish, and the first Japanese maple, which is the bloodgood. And then I began adding more Japanese maples because I particularly like them. So I chose them according to their spring color, their fall color, and their height, so that they would fit in this space and they would all be different. So I now have 12 of them. Most of them are back here in the shade because they do well in this area. And then I began filling in with azaleas and ferns and hostas. And the hellebores I added in about 1998. In a yard as small as this one is, I particularly like the vines. Another way to get ground space is to use containers, and so I've really enjoyed doing that, picking out different ways to use them and different places for them. I do enjoy having things that are handed down from generations, and I also enjoy things that friends have given me, and I have a lot of that. I have, besides the hydrangea from my grandmother, I have a fig bush from her, and from my other grandmother, a peony. So it's a nice thing to have and remember and to share. I do enjoy gardening, and it was sort of unexpected. I didn't know I was going to, but as I began working in the garden, I started remembering being a child in my grandmother's garden, and the names of the plants were still there, things she had talked about, things that meant a lot to me. And to be able to have brought plants from her garden to mine really means a lot to me.
I can't imagine my garden without roses. Their fragrance and beauty, well, it's hard to beat. You know, I grow over 30 different varieties of roses in my garden, and I'm often asked, how do you take care of them all? Well, it's all in how you choose them. You see, some rose varieties are just easier to care for than others. Many of the roses I grow are old-fashioned shrub roses. Now, you can find these old-fashioned roses from a variety of sources these days, but in the past, they were actually handed from one gardener to the next from stem cuttings. Now, making stem cuttings actually occurs later in the summer, once the flowers have faded and the new growth has matured just a bit. Let me show you how the process works. It all begins with selecting just the right stems, ones that are just under the diameter of a pencil. I make my cuts at an angle just above a leaf node, making sure the cutting is at least 4 to 5 inches long and has a couple of sets of leaves. With your cutting selected, You'll want to treat them just as you would fresh cut flowers. Get them in water immediately before moving to the next step. Now make sure you moisten the medium you're planting in, and always make my holes first before slipping the cuttings in. Now to encourage those roots to develop, stick the ends of the cuttings into a rooting powder or hormone before putting them into the planting medium. When the seasons begin to change, I have to say I enjoy spending more time outside during the evenings. And I like to take a place like this and just create an outdoor living space. You know, you don't have to build anything. What I've done here is just mowed a circle that's 14 feet in diameter. And the taller grass just sort of serves as the walls. And then back here along the backside, well, I've got room for 3 friends in these beautiful teak chairs, a blanket if it gets a little cool, and then here in the center, I've got a fire pit. Of course, this setup is strictly temporary. If you're looking for something a little more permanent, you can use elements such as containers. They can really give a garden room a great feel. You can use them to punctuate an entrance or define a space. Putting together a container can really be a snap. You just need to pick out containers that fit your garden room style and start by filling the containers with a good quality potting soil. Mix in some water and some water-retentive polymers to help the plants to retain moisture during the driest times of the year. And then pack in seasonal color, and don't forget to water and fertilize regularly. Over the years, I've had the pleasure to create lots of outdoor living spaces for a myriad of clients over the country, and I thought it might be helpful just to showcase a few of those for you. Now, this garden is a charming little garden in California. It's a simple condo with a lot of style. The front room is made up of a small space that leads you to the front door, and the back garden is a large deck that overlooks a golf course beyond. To give the homeowners some privacy, we installed raised planters and filled them with deer-resistant and drought-resistant plant varieties. Now, this garden is very different. It's in Georgia, and it was designed to take advantage of a lake view. We carved out a mossy slope and a pathway that leads you to the water source, a very old and deep spring. Now, this garden is in the mountainous regions of North Carolina. Here I helped the homeowner create an outdoor living space around this charming cottage. You see, the back porch is a great example of blurring the lines between inside and out. The fireplace and furnishings make you just want to sit back and enjoy all that fresh mountain air. Now, this charming colonial in Arkansas was nestled along a very busy street, so privacy and noise control was at the top of the list. We transformed the space from this to this. It was all thanks to simple elements such as a fountain to help distract your ear from the car noise, a table elegantly set for a dinner party, containers and plantings, and the expansion of an area to include this little reading nook that before was used to store children's toys. Now, New Jersey is known as the Garden State, and we sure enjoyed making over this front porch. We added fabrics and furnishings, repainted the front door, installed a gate to separate the front walk from a busy street, and enlarged flower beds and added in perennials with pockets of annual color that can be changed out from year to year. I think making the yearly planting simple really cuts down on the fear factor that homeowners often have when it comes to redoing a garden or creating a garden room. Well, that's all the time we have for today's show. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. The thing to remember about creating these outdoor living spaces is be creative, have some fun, and make sure it's a reflection of your own personality. And remember, enjoy the bounty and beauty of the garden. Until next time, from the Garden Home, I'm Alan Smith. More information about today's topic and other topics covered in this series can be found at pallansmith.com.
On an upcoming episode of P. Allen Smith's Garden Home.
Striking structures is the theme as we explore some of the elements that make up my garden home. From rustic trellises to metal arbors, and take a look at a project that uses recycled house shutters and transforms them into storage space. We'll cover a lot of ideas that can help you transform the space you live in. Looking forward to spending time with you right here in the Garden Home.